Hello, everyone. Welcome to Book Club Date. That's my wife, Katie.
And that's my husband, Josh.
This is episode 2 of 2 of our series on The Wager by David Grann. It's very, very exciting. So, Katie, let's get into it real quick. Just first question, you reading anything new?
No.
That's okay. I'm not reading anything new either. I'm still reading Mindhunter, and I assume you're still reading the Sweet Tea Witch series.
Yes.
Okay.
But
All right.
not that much this week. This week was all about the wager.
It was all about the wager, all about
Yeah.
boats and mutinies and craziness.
Lots of craziness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we're not going to cover the synopsis. Go to episode 1 for that if you really want it. But you just need to know some English seamen were on a ship.
And it wrecked.
And it wrecked. And they're on an island.
Stranded.
And things are not going well.
Not at all.
So, let's just get right into the discussion.
Okay.
But prior to that,
Most importantly,
we have to give our spoiler and speculation warning for the entire book.
Whole thing.
So we have read it, and you've been warned. So
there will be spoilers.
Yep. And like I just mentioned before, where we left off, the wager shipwrecked, the natives helped them, the natives left, the remaining castaways are doing their best to survive, and there's signs of military order beginning to break down in a pretty substantial way, I think is a pretty fair synopsis of where things were left off.
Yes, I'd agree.
So we're not going to do a play-by-play this week. We're going to pose questions, and then we're going to discuss them. So, honey, I've been talking for a minute.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask the question, what do we think about Buckley as a leader? Buckley is the gunner, so he's like a lower officer, I suppose. I'm not sure what his actual rank would be, but he's not quite like high level, but he's like a man of the crew, basically.
Right.
But he's kind
of leader of the crew.
Yeah. So like what?
Yeah.
What do we think?
I think he shows more natural leadership capabilities in this time of distress.
Okay, I would agree.
He seemed to be the one to keep his cool a little more and kind of get to work. You know?
Right. He's also very faith-oriented.
Yes.
So I think he has a constant, it's weird to say given their circumstance, but it seems like he has a constant comfort that he can rely on for himself.
Through his faith.
Yeah. So, here's an interesting line that I highlighted. Byron watched, this is John Byron, Byron watched as the outpost briefly united over building the Ark. Now split into two rival forces. On one side were Cheap and his small loyal cadre, and on the other were Buckley and his legions of partisans. So clearly the camp was just splitting. One was following, like seems like the majority was following Buckley. I think it was less about Buckley being a good leader and more about they were just tired of Captain Cheap.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of feelings that he wasn't doing enough. Mm-hmm. He wasn't, and I noticed this too. Like, I would have been frustrated with it as well, right? Like, for the initial shipwreck, right? Like, then you start, like, yeah, it sucks, and you can pout about it, but then you have to go into action. And you've got to, obviously you need to salvage what you can. You need to put a focus on food. But it seemed like, and I don't know if this was or was not a discussion. It was not included if it was, but there was not a lot of initial discussion of what do we do next.
Right.
And I got a little frustrated actually reading because I was like, what's the plan, guys? What are we need to start discussing what's the plan? What are we going to do next? Where are we going to go? How are we going to get there? What are we going to do? Because obviously you're not going to survive for tremendously long on this island, right? It's not like you're going to live out the rest of your days on this island. Like some of them obviously did, but not like, it's not a paradise, right? It's very barren.
Well, some of them did.
Not in a good way.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like, you're not going to stay there. It's not an area where ships are coming by frequently. It's not next to a port or something like that. So you need to get to planning to, like, what's the next step. And I feel like Cheap was, like, halfway there, right? Like, he did, like, they all kind of understood, okay, we need to salvage and we need to collect our food stores. We need to explore the island, see what we can harvest from the island. But there really wasn't a lot of talk about, and then what?
Yeah, it seemed like it took a long time.
Yeah.
I wanna
Like,
say
it took at least a month.
I think it took more for someone.
It might have been 2 months before they started to be like,
We should build a boat.
right.
Yeah. Yeah, before like and
Or really, like, let's retrofit what we have. Let's fix the boats that we have.
right, cuz I can understand initially you're just trying to get set up so that way you can survive,
Mm-hmm.
and also with the hope of maybe Anson will turn around, or perhaps he survived and he's looking for you.
Right.
Right, like, so I understand that, but yeah, there was
But also, like, there were ships that had already been lost prior on the journey in the Drake Passage.
right, and they didn't turn around.
They didn't turn around for them, so I wouldn't expect that.
Right. So
Even with Cheap having in mind, like, we're going to follow my orders, we're going to get to this island, we're going to meet with Anson and the rest of the contingent. Like, he still, like, he did not pursue steps to get to that initially.
right, and
Like, it was a long while before anyone was like, let's figure out how to get these smaller boats in shape enough that we can go somewhere.
yeah, I think it was the carpenter Cummins was his name. Who I think so. Who was like, I could probably, if we get that longboat out there,
Right, out of
I
the
could-
wreckage.
I could probably build us something. Like,
Yeah, we could
Um,
probably extend it.
yeah. So, but anyway, so they built that. But and it's interesting because, and this is where like I think like there's between a good leader and a mediocre one, which I think Captain Cheap just wanted to be a leader. He didn't actually necessarily want to help people. He wanted the recognition, I think, but without
Mm-hmm.
any of the hard work. So,
Well,
if
I
you-
think he was, like, halfway there.
Yeah.
Like, there were some things he did well, but there was a lot of missed opportunities.
Right. Well, you compare it to, and I know he was recovering initially, right? Because
Right.
he got hurt, so he was kind of like, I'm recovering. I literally can't do anything. And when you're recovering from an injury, and you're actually recovering, you sleep a lot because your body is dedicating all of its energy to healing whatever happened to you.
Right.
But you compare what Sheep did to Anson whenever he was a castaway for a brief moment,
Right.
for about 3 weeks.
Completely different.
Yeah, like within less than a week, they were already
different.
building a boat. In 3 weeks,
I think the other
Their
thing
ship came
too
back,
is
but-
Anson. He got in there.
he did.
You know, he led by example. He was not afraid to, like, put the work in to get in beside his men and start, doing what had to be done. Like, yeah, you've got that rank, but in a trauma situation, you might need to pitch in.
Correct.
So, and I don't think Cheap did that as well. He kind of hovered in his tent and wanted everyone to bow to his will.
Yeah.
And there was some question about his authority because they weren't on the ship anymore. And it was very unclear. It seemed to the very top levels of the government even whether
When
he
you're marooned
actually
on an island.
and not on the ship.
Yeah.
Whose authority are you actually under?
Yeah, because you could argue that one of the Marines, the commanding officer of the Marines,
Oh yeah, he
should
was
be in
like,
charge at that point.
Well, and he was of his men. He did take over his leadership of his own men. He was
Mhm.
like, you know what? We're on land. I'm in charge of
Right.
this group, at least.
Right. Well, I think I like how we post wishes Buckley as a leader, but we went to Cheap and Anson. But anyway, I think Byron said it best here, or at least in his writings here.
Mm-hmm.
Byron was somewhat circumspect in his writings, but it is clear that he felt duty bound to Cheap. and that he viewed Buckley, who seemed to relish his newfound status, as someone who was undermining the captain and fueling his deep insecurities and paranoia. Moreover, Cheap, in laying out his plan, had evoked the kind of imperial heroism and sacrifice that mythopoetic life of the sea, extolled in the romances Byron so loved. And I think Byron is a good, like, at least from the writings that Grann was able to pull from. He seems to be like the good, like, standard seaman who was like in the middle of most things, and he and Byron was neutral.
He was
until a long way, and then he kind of flip flops because he frankly is just like, I don't know what is right, morally right or otherwise. So I think Byron's a good window into kind of this question.
I think a lot of readers can probably relate to Byron because it's a situation where there's not necessarily a right answer.
No, there's not. I mean, there are no right answers in this situation. It's
right.
Just, it's awful.
It like you are. It's survival. Like,
yeah. Well, let us know what you thought of not just Buckley as a leader, but Captain David Cheap, Hansen, all of them. Let us know your thoughts on like what you think makes a good leader. And we're going to go and move on to our next discussion question, which is, was Cheap in the right or wrong to kill Cousins? So obviously we're assuming you read the book. The circumstances around this, I think, would rattle anybody in a position. Like, I mean, it wasn't just like you're about to be overthrown. Cheap, I think, honestly, was in a situation where he was like, I don't know what's going to happen in the next 5 minutes here.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm going to be alive.
Right.
So, like, what do you think?
I think Cheap was at his wit's end and slightly paranoid. He knew that he was not endeared to his men. He knew his leadership was in question. And because I think he valued his title of captain so much, I don't think he was in necessarily the right frame of mind. You know, people have different reactions to stress, and that could be, you know, any kind, like situational or emotional or whatever, and he had all of it. And I don't think he responded well in general. And I think the killing of Cousins was sort of the peak of that.
Yeah, he was at his wit's end, you know, and here's the actual excerpt from the book. Hearing the shot and the shouting about mutiny, Cheap burst out of his dwelling. His eyes were ablaze, his pistol already in hand. Squinting in the rain, he looked around for Cousins, whom he was certain had fired the bullet, and shouted, "Where is that villain?" There was no reply, but he spied Cousins amid the growing crowd. Cheap walked over and, with neither questions nor ceremony, placed the cool tip of the barrel against Cousins' left cheek. Then, as he would later describe it, he proceeded to extremities, which is one way to describe shooting someone in the
pulling the trigger.
Yeah.
You
know, and here's Byron again with his kind of neutral stance, right? Byron thought that however wrong Cousins' actions had been, Cheap's response was inexcusable. And I do think wasn't Cousins kind of the most vocal critic of Cheap?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like they weren't on best of terms anyway.
They were not on good terms. I think they had already been. I think Cousins had already kind of pushed the line a bit to the point where like Cheap was ready to have a trial, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like have a tribunal or whatever their version of taking him to trial was. And he had stayed strong in wanting to keep things like by the law, by the maritime law that they followed. And he went over the edge. And he was also like, I think Cheap, and who knows what Cheap was being told as well, but I think Cheap had convinced himself that Cousins was trying to overthrow his authority and whatnot. And maybe yes, maybe no. But either way, it was not, I don't think it was right of him to go to that extreme. Like, there's no going back from that.
Yeah, it's like the final. Honestly, yeah, I think.
And Cousins didn't I do think it's important to
I think it's important.
I think it's important to note that Cousins did not pass away right away. He lingered for 2 weeks.
Yes. It's about the
With-
surgery.
Yeah, 2 surgeries
Mm-hmm.
because the bullet was lodged in his jaw, I think, or in his cheek or something. Part of his jaw was broken. The bullet was lodged in his cheek, and then like a sliver had come off as well. And it wasn't even the main surgeon. The main surgeon didn't show up for the surgery, so it was the assistant who actually performed the surgery on the fly.
Right. So it's like an uphill battle for Cousins.
Oh yeah,
the
but to
whole way.
linger for 2 weeks.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a headshot doesn't mean immediate death necessarily,
Right.
right? Like it can mean a very slow demise, kind of similar to like a gut wound or something,
Mm.
But anyway, what do you think? Cheap right? Was he wrong? Was Cousins right or wrong? Pretty high stress situation.
Was everyone right? and
Was
wrong?
everybody wrong? What do you think? So we're gonna move on to the next one here. Whose plan would you have been in favor of once they had the Ark, and they knew the Ark was a possibility? Would you have been in favor of Captain Cheap's or Buckley's? Cheap wanted to go to that Spanish settlement about 350 miles north.
Right.
He wanted to basically steal a Spanish ship
Mm-hmm.
and then re-meet up with Anson.
Yeah.
Easy. All you gotta do is go 350
easy.
miles and just steal a ship.
Right.
But Buckley's wasn't easy either. He wanted to take the Ark and go through Drake's Passage.
He wanted to go through the Strait of Magellan.
The Strait of Magellan. I apologize. He went.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that was between. So Drake's Passage is around the southern tip
Okay.
of South America, and then the Strait of Magellan is between Tierra del Fuego. So a little bit north of
Okay.
there. It's a passage a little bit north of there.
Either way, Buckley's was a 2,500 mile long journey, like 2,500 miles
To
longer
3,000. Yeah.
than
It was a
than Cheap's.
long
Yeah.
journey.
So it was not easy. What would you have been like if you were in
I
that
have
situation?
no
Which one would you
idea.
vote for?
I have no idea because obviously Cheap's plan involved a shorter distance, but there's no guarantee that Anson hasn't already been there and left. Because like I said, it took them quite a while before anyone was like, oh, we could salvage that boat, extend it, and make it a little bit bigger.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure I would have been for Cheap's plan, just because I would have been like, I don't know, that Anson would still come.
Right.
I would have been like, okay, but what do we do if Anson's not there? We're in enemy territory.
Right. And Anson could be like 2,000 miles into the Pacific by the time you get that
He
ship.
could be 2,000 miles into the Pacific. He could be dead.
Yeah, you don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a very,
They don't know what happened to his ship at that point.
that's a very
So
good point.
I guess I would be more inclined with Bulkley's plan, just because you're going to head into more friendly territory
Yes.
eventually.
Right.
Eventually. But
Right. Well, I mean, I would be in favor of Cheap's plan if they would have been like, again,
it depends on
I
the
don't-
timing, though, right? Like, I can't recall if Anson's note or orders said anything about like a time frame. If it had been like, meet up by this point on, or like obviously it said meet up on this island,
mm-hmm.
but I don't know if it had said like by this certain time, right?
I thought it did.
I thought it had been like 4 months.
Yeah, I thought it was like we'll meet here, like we'll rendezvous here, and if it wasn't highlighted in the book about how long they would wait, I imagine in that correspondence.
I would hope,
would be.
because they were clear, like there was enough evidence within the book that we could tell that they were keeping track of time.
Mm-hmm.
Like there were several times they were like, oh, and it's Sunday. Oh, and we realized it's Christmas.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think it would depend on the timing as to which one I would be more inclined to go with.
I didn't really look at the map. Did you, between like Wager Island and say the Andes?
Mm-hmm.
Is it feasible for would it have been feasible for them to go from Wager Island to the mainland? Try for that, and then you have
Possibly.
nothing but just land to walk up north.
Possibly.
You know,
But
there's a lot of unknowns.
the Andes are huge mountains.
It's a big mountain range. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's called the end of the world for a reason.
And lots of snow. So I don't know.
Yeah.
We know that when Sheep does go, when they do make their way up, they have to leave those 4 Marines. And I think that is on the mainland. And
Well, that's on an island, I think, a little bit further north.
is it an island or the mainland?
I thought it was.
But I know when they came back, it was a cove. It was in a cove.
Yeah.
But I know when they came back, the soldiers, the Marines were gone.
Yes.
And I was like, well, of course they were gone. Like, why would they stay? They're not going to survive just sitting on the beach. So obviously they're going to make their own way then. Now, we never hear back from them, but we don't know.
Yeah. Do you think because they had to make a decision, right, about the the quote here is that 4 members of the party would have to remain behind. This is on Sheep's kind of escape, or they would all perish. 4 Marines were selected. Being soldiers, they lacked sailing skills. The Marines were fixed on as not being of any service on board. Okay, sure. Campbell confessed, noting this was a melancholy thing, but necessity compelled us. He recorded each of the Marines' last names: Smith, Hobbs, Hertford, and Crosslet, and I think there's islands in that area named after them now. And then, like you just mentioned, whenever they returned, because they couldn't get around that kind of cliffside,
Right.
Except for a musket lying on the beach, there was no trace of them. They had undoubtedly perished, but where were their bodies? The castaways sought some way to commemorate the 4 men. This bay we named Marine Bay, Byron wrote. So do you think that Sheep should have attempted to squeeze those Marines in, like even if they weren't useful in that moment, that particular time, or does survival at any cost take precedent?
I think he should have tried to squeeze them in.
I agree.
Especially when you've got people dying like flies.
Yes. I mean, surely having
Some
is better than nothing.
and some of the sailing skills, like, I'm sure they could have learned.
Well, I'm sure. I mean, they spent basically like 5 or 6 months on a ship at least.
Right.
Not even counting their past experience. Surely they knew enough.
Isn't it helpful to have an extra pair of hands when you need one?
Right.
So, okay, so their journey up did actually go between a bunch of islands and the mainland of Chile. So this doesn't identify the map in the book. Doesn't identify the Marine Bay.
Yeah.
Or which islands are named after these guys. But they did go up through... Oh, because they were trying to go around the Cape, and they went over, and then up. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it looks like they did end up going up between
I see that.
the islands and the mainland.
Well, let us know if you guys think that they should have squeezed the Marines and Sheep should have made more of an attempt. And also let us know whose plan you would be in favor of.
Yeah.
Interesting to know. Kind of rounding back to Sheep, because, again, he's the captain, so we have to talk about him. There were moments where Sheep really did kind of have some Banff moments, right?
Yeah.
Where he kind of really stood his ground, and here's at least 2, right? Sheep did something even more startling to assert his authority. He emerged from his bunker without his weapon and faced the raging mob. Here, the captain showed all the conduct and courage imaginable, Buckley admitted. He was a single man against the multitude, all of them dissatisfied with him, and all of them in arms. And in that moment, not one person, not Buckley, not Pemberton, not even the violent boatswain King, dared lay a finger on their captain. And then another quote here: Buckley couldn't help conveying in his written account a certain admiration for his adversary. Here Cheap was, defeated, bound, humiliated, and yet he remained composed, steady, and courageous. He had finally, like a true captain, mastered himself. So there's like moments where like Cheap really misses the mark, but it seems like when it comes to defending his pride, he will stand up for that
Yeah.
no matter what, which is both a good thing and a bad thing in terms of like being a leader, right? Because no one's going to follow someone who's not proud of themselves,
Right, and doesn't have that kind of.
But you kind of wish he would
energy.
show the same constitution when it came to taking care of his men,
Right.
you know. So,
Well, I think perhaps, there might be some question about Cheap's authority, because he was basically promoted on the fly after they lost a couple other captains in Anson's whole party. So it's not like he started this journey as a captain. He got promoted as they were sailing. So
yeah, but that's like a battlefield type promotion anyway. So like it's again, this is me thinking of a more modern understanding of it, but in our modern military, at least, like a chain of command is absolute.
mm-hmm.
So if you're promoted, that's the leader.
Yeah.
Period.
And I think the men had an easier time accepting him as the leader while they were on the ship.
Yeah, because it's like mutiny really was.
But some of them blamed him, and at this point, I think there was already a group that had separated from the main camp as well.
Yeah, they kind of.
They didn't record any of their adventure on the other side of the island.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, they recruited one to build the ark, to help come and build the ark.
Yeah.
Right. And then they
and he died later.
Yeah, and then after Buckley left, Cheap did basically amend things with them, right? Because he needed bodies
and like
to help make
half
their
of
march.
them came with Cheap, but some of them stayed.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds terrible.
Yeah.
Sounds awful. So, I mean, and talking about things that...
Either way, I don't think staying was necessarily the best choice.
Yeah, but, talking about things that are awful, cannibalism. Ever allowable? What do you think?
Man.
Again, there's no good answers
There's
at this
no
book to
good
the
answer
situation.
here.
But, yeah.
Yeah.
You can also pass on it, too.
Yeah.
Tell you what, we will just read John Byron's comment on it. Though most of the men knew not to even mention cannibalism in their written records, Byron acknowledged that some began to butcher and eat their dead companions, what Byron referred to as the, quote, last extremity.
And some of these guys, like, I'm sure were not even fully aware of what they were doing. Like,
Yeah.
it kind of described, like, the one boy kind of being, like, in a daze when he did.
You mean like whenever he was cannibalizing someone?
Yeah. But it was,
By the way,
it
YouTube, don't hand us with the word cannibalism. This is a discussion. YouTube's gonna be like, cannibalism. No.
Hold up.
Kill that video.
Maybe we should stop saying it.
Yeah, it's fine. Okay.
It was always dead companions. They didn't kill anyone for food.
Right.
But do keep in mind that they do with several non-traditionally livestock animals. One of which I read right before bed.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The dog.
I should have known.
Oh, I saw that coming.
This is gonna happen. No, my happy little oblivious mind was like, oh, he found a friend. The dog's gonna help him hunt or something.
The dog probably would have.
Probably, because he was one of the natives. He was one of the Kawaskar dogs.
Right.
So he probably would have.
Yeah, that was a hard one to read, that whole scene.
Yeah.
where they take his dog.
That was, oh.
Yeah, it was rough. So, that
So
was rough.
you've been warned because
Yeah. So
my little mind did not go there.
yeah. So how about this? How about you guys just let us know your thoughts on eating unalived companions?
Or don't.
Or don't. That's cool too.
We don't need to go there.
So, we already mentioned that Cheap should have tried to squeeze the Marines in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think Buckley and the crew should have made more attempts to rescue the castaways after the rudder broke, right? Because they sent like 6 men or so
Yeah.
on the shore to look for food and just resources, right?
Yeah.
But like their rudder broke, so they couldn't get close enough. And I guess like when we say boat, like they're long, like the long boat is like if you saw it in front of you, you'd be like, that's a big boat, right? So like I don't think they could necessarily get close. And with the rudder broken, they couldn't steer, so they couldn't get back to like the mainland. And I guess they drifted far enough out to where swimming wouldn't be possible.
I thought that was a little unclear.
Yeah, I wasn't 100% sure, but what we do know is that Buckley and the crew, they placed some guns and ammunition as well as a letter explaining their decision in a barrel and then tossed it overboard, letting the waves wash it ashore. They waited until Duck, Morris, and 6 others had received it, so it was 8. When the men read the letter, they fell to their knees and watched as the Speedwell sailed away. So their decision, of course, being that we're leaving you guys behind, we can't navigate over to you. I guess with their sails, they could still push forward, but they couldn't turn necessarily. Again, I am not a seafarer, so I am
Nor
not.
am I.
I am not 100% sure, but these guys
I
could.
mean, you could have at least given them an attempt to swim back.
Yes.
They didn't even let them try. They were just like, sorry, see ya.
But the most shocking thing is 3 months after the court martial at the end of all this, right, that 3 of those crew members, including Isaac Morse, they arrived back in Portsmouth. And for them, it had been more than 4 years since these men had swum ashore in Patagonia with a small party from the Speedwell to gather provisions. 4 years from when they were cast away a second time, which is nuts to think about.
Yeah.
And I thought the saddest part, because they allude to it, was Duck's
saddest.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us about this part?
So Duck was the freed black man. And they said that Duck's fate was unknown, as is the case for so many people whose stories can never be told. I believe he will end his days in bondage, Morris wrote, there being no prospect of his ever returning to England. And I think later it does say, the one guy, I think it was Midshipman Morris, who did confirm that Duck was taken into slavery again.
Yeah.
And that was heartbreaking. And Morris was buddies with him too, and he was he didn't even know where to find him. He was, like it said, he didn't know whether he had been taken to the fields, whether he had been thrown on another ship, like where he had been. But I got the impression that he would have tried to find him.
Yeah, I mean, Duck could have ended his days anywhere in the Americas. I think
at that point,
the only probable thing that you could assume would be that he ended his days in bondage, as Morris said.
Yeah.
So very, very, very sad ending. Possibly, depending on Buckley's decision, could have avoided that. So
yeah,
that one was sad. But moving forward to the trial, was it right for Buckley to publish his account after returning to England, or should he have waited for the trial, like Captain Cheap? So Buckley wrote his account of what happened because he was one of, I think, the few men who basically kept a journal / logbook of everything that happened.
Yeah.
He made it a point to do that.
I mean, I think the main guys you follow in the book are the ones that kept a log,
right,
or journal of the events.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And the excerpt here is the account was something striking in English letters. Though hardly a work of literature, the journal was packed with more narrative and personal detail than a traditional logbook, and the story was told in a bracing new voice. that of a hard-nosed seaman. In contrast to the often flowery and convoluted prose of the time, it was written in a crisp style that reflected Buckley's personality and was, in many ways, distinctly modern. The gunner declared that the journal had a plain maritime style. And then when Cheap returned, here's Cheap burned to tell his own version, but he wouldn't play John Buckley's game and publish a book. Instead, he would save his testimony and fury for a forum more determinative, a court-martial composed of a panel of judges, all of them commanding officers like him. So I mean, Buckley was serving in the Navy and all that.
Well, he arrived significantly, like 2 years before Cheap and Byron, right?
I think so.
Yeah, so it was quite a while ahead of time, and he was trying to sway public opinion.
Yeah, because he also knew, like from Cheap's perspective, like this implication here, all of them, a panel of judges, all of them commanding officers like him. So Cheap was pretty confident that he could, as captain, and kind of just how the command chain was, that he would be, that the trial would be more in his favor from the start.
Right.
Buckley, I think, had a suspicion that if he did nothing, he was damned. If he did this, if he published, right, there may be a chance that he
could survive
and get out of this.
Yeah.
Or at least not be reprimanded as hard. Right. Because it's in America, we have freedom of speech and all that, and et cetera. But here's the thing, like every country, every government and all that has to deal with public opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Buckley, on an instinctual level, probably knew that.
Yeah.
Right. And like you said, he was trying to sway public opinion.
Yeah, he was. And I think it also said too that Buckley and the other guys were basically destitute at this point. They didn't come back with a successful, journey. They didn't come back on a ship filled with treasures.
Like Anson. Right,
but Anson didn't even get there until way after Cheap, after the trial even, I thought.
I'm not sure.
Maybe not quite after the trial, but he didn't get back for a while.
Yeah, I mean, it was...
Anson got back before the marooned guys from Buckley's half of the journey. Like, he got back before them. So I think the order was Buckley's group, Captain Cheap's group, Anson, and then the marooned guys from Buckley's group, in order of returning to England.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think part of it was of Buckley publishing his account was to get finances as a way to get money, because they weren't allowed to really take on any jobs. There was like one job that Buckley asked permission to take, and they let him, but it was like up the river. It wasn't an abroad type of gig.
Yeah, I mean, there was concern, and probably rightfully so, about someone fleeing, right? Which, I mean, I get that. It's just unfortunate that there wasn't any support system or any way to kind of make money. It's not like Buckley could pick up a job at McDonald's or something.
Right. Now, I did think it was kind of funny that, like, they all kind of started publishing their own accounts and stuff.
Yeah, and
like it would have been a crazy time to be in England getting like all these little
it was basically a modern Facebook. Just like everyone's different versions.
Basically, like
just like and then
a paper war.
And everyone's going fake news. Right?
Yeah.
So, it's
the only one who didn't right away was Byron. He waited until he was older.
He waited until after Captain Cheap passed.
He did. Yeah. He did. And then he kind of like, I think hindsight too, he was able, and after rising through the ranks himself, I think he was more clearly able to see like, yeah, Cheap made some poor decisions.
Yeah, they even stated that he didn't really talk about it throughout the rest of his career until he published.
And that was after he had retired and after Cheap had passed.
Correct.
Now, I did think it was interesting that The one account was it a reverend or a priest on Anson's boat? And then it turned out to be like partly Anson's account as well.
I think it was Anthony's account is what they were getting at.
But they
But Anson doesn't like
attributed it.
writing.
Yeah, so it was almost like it was ghost written, but not. It was like, it'd be like if a celebrity wrote a biography on themselves, but told their pastor to put their name on it as the author instead of their own.
Right.
So it's like an autobiography, but like using someone else as like your pen name, but using someone who actually exists.
Yeah.
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 I thought it was kind of funny.
It's like you're the ghostwriter, but you didn't write anything. But it's about you. You're right. It was kind of interesting.
Yeah. Well, because sometimes like people like write those biographies, but it's ghost written, right? So someone who actually is a writer will take their stories and write it.
Right.
So it was like that, except Anson didn't want it to be known. He didn't want to be labeled as the author. So they said it was the other guy.
So he wanted it to appear impartial,
I guess.
as I think was his goal, maybe.
Maybe. But it definitely made him out to be the hero. Not that he wasn't, but...
Yeah, I mean, because talking about kind of what he did here, you know,
Mm-hmm.
one of the questions that we have here is, was the reward worth the sacrifice that Anson gathered? The excerpt here is Anson, you know, his forces had withered from some 2,000 to a mere 227, and many of them were just boys. He had only a third of the complement required to properly operate a man of war of the centurion's size, which was his ship.
Mm-hmm.
After they took that Spanish galleon, a share of the prize money was given to each seaman, about 300 pounds, some 20 years worth of wages. So these guys could retire basically immediately, or they could start up their own little business or whatever they wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
Anson, who was soon promoted to rear admiral, was awarded about 90,000 pounds, the equivalent today of $20 million. So,
it's wild.
Anson's perspective, getting 20 million, he probably would say yes, that it was worth the sacrifice.
I think he also saw it as for the glory of the nation.
Yeah, but there's even, you know, like...
But that's such a huge loss of life.
Yeah. I mean, like a huge loss of life, and also like the criticism too. I think someone said that this amount pales in comparison to what has been spent on this war.
Mm-hmm.
Like, doesn't even come close.
Right.
So.
Well, and that's like, you know, not to mention the loss of the ships. Like, I don't know how expensive those ships were to build, but like that's huge. That's got to be a huge amount to build and maintain all these ships, all the supplies, all the men. Like, do we know if the families received any money from their deceased relatives?
That's a really good question, and that's not mentioned anywhere.
It is not. So if you know, please let us know in the comments, because I'm curious.
Yeah, that's something. Let's see here. Our next discussion is kind of coming back around to the trial.
Mm-hmm.
The trial basically, it either cleared everyone's name or let them off with, I would say, a light reprimand. I think there's only one person who got like a reprimand.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the trial did not focus on mutiny or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
The trial only focused on was Cheap responsible for the ship wreck, right? Like for the ship being run aground on the rocks. And Cheap is the only one who mentioned someone else. And that individual got a slap on the wrist. And that was it. Like there was no, and it is interesting that even after all that they had been through, and the men were kind of like, what's happening. Because they fully expected to be accused of mutiny and, worst case scenario, be hanged. Like, that's what they were expecting.
That's why they were all pushing to publish their own accounts.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And then, like, no one asked about that at the trial. No one touched it. It was just about who's responsible for the shipwreck.
Yeah, and you know,
And even after all that, even after everything they had been through, none of them were like, yeah, it was cheap. None of them. They were like, no,
yeah,
not responsible.
yeah. Buckley even said, "I can lay nothing to the charge of any officer."
Yeah, even after, like, essentially just really, like, just destroying Cheap's reputation in his book. And he was just like, nope.
Yeah, it was basically like, okay, John, now that you're on the record,
Yeah,
was Cheap a bad captain?
yeah.
And Buckley kind of read the room,
Mm-hmm.
and he was like, he was fine.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of
They were all
proceeded.
kind of like, under the circumstances, no. Like,
Yeah. So yeah, like
and that kind of was it. Like, they really didn't go into anything. And I did think it was interesting, like how are you going to handle it, right? Are You
yeah,
have to be able to clearly say this was a clear mutiny while they were on land. And I thought it was interesting that it mentioned that according to the law at the time, because it was confusing, right? So there was one idea that because they were on land, they were not getting paid anymore for being in service, and therefore the rules of the of being like on the ship did not apply at that time. Therefore, they could not run a court martial on that. And then there was this other rule or law that they had to be paid as long as they were able to gather supplies from the ship. And
which was the whole time.
Except, I mean, even when they were on the little boats sailing, they still had supplies from the ship. So that might be a gray area. But it almost seemed like if we let them off the hook for this, like, then were they paid? Like, I don't know. I don't know if they were paid for that whole time where they were basically marooned on this island, because they were still getting supplies from the shipwreck.
Mm-hmm.
Or did they kind of like let that wash and be like, oh, well, but you weren't on the ship, so we didn't have to pay you, which is what these guys assumed.
Yeah, and that's
So
why
I'm just saying this was not answered. So if you know, maybe let us know. But I don't know if while these guys were stranded on the island, whether in the end it was determined that because they were getting supplies from the ship, they still needed to be paid, or because they were on land, they were not paid. So regardless of the laws and the inkiness there, I don't know whether they were paid or not for that time.
I'm not sure they were, because it was basically
It seemed like they were kind of like
you can either
we're not going to deal with the whole mutiny thing, but we're also not going to pay you for that time.
Yeah, you know, and after the whole trial, the actual.
But what good would getting paid be if you were killed then? Like, if you were hanged, like,
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah. And the excerpt here is, after the trial, there were no further proceedings, no adjudication of whether Cheap had been guilty of murder or whether Buckley and his followers had mutinied and attempted to kill their commander. There was not even a hearing on whether any of the men had been guilty of desertion or quarreling with a superior officer. The British authorities, it seemed... Oh no, the screen went black. Sorry. The British authorities, it seemed, didn't want either side's story to prevail. And David Grann basically sums up what he believes the reason to be for their wanting to not side on either story, to just kind of let this thing go underneath the rug, was, quote, "A mutiny, especially in times of war, can be so threatening to the established order that it is not even officially recognized as one. So I think that's what it all comes down to. They were like, this wasn't a mutiny if we don't recognize it was a mutiny. There's nothing to look at here if we just move on from this.
Yeah.
And fortunately Buckley read the room because he could have absolutely kept pushing.
Mm-hmm.
And they would have probably had to been like, okay, let's do the trial.
Right. Well, and it seems like some of the fascination with this whole event, because the trial was like, what, 2 years or so after Buckley got back?
Yeah.
Like
long time.
It was quite a while, so it seemed like some of the fascination with this whole event had started to die down as far as like the public was concerned.
Yeah.
And so I don't think the officials wanted to extend it at all. I think they were like, let's move on. Like, let's put this to rest. Let's move on. It's not going to do anyone any good to really delve into this anymore.
Yeah.
But also, I think part of you has to think, like, these guys have been through some crazy stuff. Like,
Yeah.
Do we want to put everyone through a long extended trial on top of what they've already been through?
Yeah, I think I don't, maybe perhaps a level of it was like, these guys have already been through hell and back.
Yeah.
Let's just, if they're
they've done their time.
If they're willing to play along, let's just move on from this and let them move on with their lives.
Yeah.
And there may have been a level to that. It may have been more like what's their incentive for wanting to play along,
Mm-hmm.
and that was probably chief among them.
Yeah. No, I did find it interesting that it talked about later how Anson, the, initial guy in charge of this whole, like, little grouping of ships, ended up getting promoted and such, that he actually ended up basically reforming how
The rules. Yeah.
And kind of how these things were structured, and the expectations and stuff. And there were quite a few reforms that he kind of spearheaded to modernize how things happened and kind of clear up, like, if this were to happen, here's what, here's how we handle this. And they did restructure to have a contingent of Marines that was like naval Marines. Like, they were, they were supposed to be on ships and capable of functioning on a ship and not just be like
Passengers.
Yeah. Who could be, abandoned on shore because they have no function.
No, they don't know how to row a boat. Okay.
Yeah. I would have been like, I will learn how to row a boat.
I can learn. I'm a fast learner.
Yeah.
I can do it.
Yeah.
Well, you know what, viewer? You let us know what you thought about the trial.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the government was trying to do? Do you think the trial should have actually have gotten to the center of everything and try and resolve this? Do you think it was best for everyone that it was just more or less swept underneath the rug? You let us know. Yeah.
Yeah, there's like a lot of ways you can go with it, and a lot of them that aren't wrong.
I agree. So, the wager, Katie, if you want to give us a little log line, what are your thoughts on the wager? Because I think this was not your style of reading whatsoever.
This was not.
I'm curious.
This was not at all. I think I said it in the first one. It felt to me like reading the script of a documentary, and it did throughout the entire time. There were lots of excerpts. I got a little bored in the middle where they're on the island and things are still like deteriorating. Relationships are deteriorating. Mutiny is gradually being decided on, right? Like, it was not long, or it was not a short process. It was not a sudden decision that they made. So for me, I was kind of like, but what are we going to do? But what are you going to do? Where are you going to go? You're not going to stay there. What are you going to do? Someone please start talking about this. So I did get a little bored with that part as well. And it was a little trickier for me to get through. I mentioned as well, there is a lot of jargon, and I think Josh did have me watch the first 20 minutes of that movie,
Master and Commander.
of that one. And that does give a good visual, I think, of what's going on. And you can kind of see when they're like, okay, we're going to battle. And that gives you a visual of what happens with that. And, from them throwing sand on the ground to add some traction and whatnot. It did give a good idea of the visual of what happened, but I would not read it again.
Okay. That's fine. That's fine. Did you feel like you got something out of it?
A history lesson.
Okay.
It was also very it's difficult for me to read about such a horrendous experience.
Yeah, so I don't read books like this all the time. I'm not a huge history buff, but I do enjoy them. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I enjoy history tales like this that have been told in what I call fast history, where it's kind of compelling and it's and a historian has compiled everything and
he had
made
a lot
enjoyable.
of
the reason
primary sources.
Yeah, and
which I think helps.
Yeah, and the reason why I enjoy books like this is because there is always a point where it feels mythic.
Mm-hmm.
Like this couldn't possibly have happened. And then it does. And it has. Kind of like reading Splendid in the Vial about Winston Churchill. There's certain things in that where you're just like, there's no way. But you're like, yeah, I mean, World War II was a thing.
Yeah.
And it just feels like it's almost its own other world.
Yeah.
Because of the distance of time between us and that moment in history. Mm-hmm. And just the insurmountable odds that if someone told you this story on the street, you wouldn't believe it. You wouldn't believe it.
They were lying.
Yeah. So it's just
nah, that's just a tall tale, man.
Yeah, and that's what I like about historical books like this that
mm-hmm.
that kind of tell it in a more entertaining, fast-paced way. I found it very enjoyable. I understand it's not everyone's cup of tea, mm-hmm. but I think if you enjoy history and you're okay with tragedy,
yeah, I think that is
you would enjoy this one.
Yeah, and if you're okay with the dog dying.
Yes, that one was tough.
That one was. I'm sorry. It was right before bed.
Yeah. Okay, well, that was the wager.
Yeah.
Throw your thoughts in the comment. Katie.
Yes.
Moving on to the wrap-up and revealing our next book.
Yes.
So, take it away. This is Katie's choice.
Oh. So I was debating between a couple, and so we put them in front of our beagle and went with the one that he chose, which was the one he spent the most time sniffing. But I think it'll be good because next month is February, and so we're going in a completely different direction with a romance.
That's fine.
Now, I don't know the heat level of this one, just so you've been forewarned. Everyone's been warned. I don't know. But it is Once More with Feeling by Alyssa Sussman.
Sounds sus. That's what the kids say, right? I'm kidding. That guy on the podcast is trying to be cool.
And this one is about 400 pages. So, I don't know. We'll probably read, half of it?
We can also edit it, too. But we want to keep it manageable. So...
Do you want to do, the first 100 pages? It's 400 pages.
400 pages?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would say the first 100 or so. I would say read up and read through chapter 10. Because that clearly gets us to this.
Yeah.
Kind of breaking point. Okay.
Right.
So you can just start from there. We're reading up to chapter 10.
Okay. So it's about 400 pages, and we are going to read through chapter 10. So read chapter 10.
So read up to and through
up
chapter
to and
10.
through chapter 10. So this one will be broken into 4 parts.
4 parts, yeah.
4 parts. Because we
Again-
try to do about 100 to 150 pages per episode.
And we try to keep it manageable and find good breaking points because we know sometimes people are just trying to just improve their reading habits. And at times, the reason why we do this, because we like talking about books, and we find talking about books encourages us to finish books. So maybe it'll encourage you to finish books. So again, last time I'll say it, Once More with Feeling is the next book. We will read from chapter 1 up to and through chapter 10, which seems to be a good breaking point from what we were able to gather.
Mm-hmm.
So you can follow us on podcasts anywhere.
On YouTube.
You can follow us on YouTube. Like, subscribe, leave a
We're working on the
review.
other social medias.
Yeah. Anything helps. We appreciate your time. Hopefully you enjoyed it.
And if you have any other book suggestions, let us know those as well.
But until next time, that's my wife, Katie.
And that's my husband, Josh.
And this has been Book Club Date.
Bye.